Well, what are you afraid of? Oh, there are many things to be afraid of today. A lot of things that when you listen to talk radio start to really get you nervous and wound up and concerned. We talk about that arch nemesis George Soros, who's trying to collapse our economy. And then there are reports of nuclear weapons in North Korea and the possibility of them being sold to other rogue nations or even worse, to terrorists. We live with the thought of a nuclear bomb going off in one of our major cities, or one of our nuclear power plants being attacked with an airplane, destroying it. Oh, we could go on. There are all kinds of reasons to be afraid. If you were in Israel long ago, you would also have many reasons to be afraid. You lived in the middle of major earthly powers. To the south there was Egypt, a once great mighty empire continuing to rattle its sabers and create havoc throughout the Middle East. To the north you have Assyria, now somewhat on the decline, rising power of Babylon on the edge of history, and even farther off you will have the Medo-Persian Empire taking over that. And then Alexander and the Greeks after that. Israel is but a land bridge between the Middle East and Africa. They sit in the middle of all of this conflict with nations that are far bigger, far more powerful than they. And so perhaps they had reason to be afraid, or at least on a human level. You can understand why they'd be concerned. How do you address such concerns? How do you deal with these powers that are on your doorstep, who have massive amounts of people, far superior weapons, greater amounts of wealth and so forth, and who, to boot, are wicked people? How do you relate to these people and maintain your own safety? The temptation was to try to make deals. Go to Egypt, negotiate a treaty. Go to Syria or Assyria, negotiate treaties. And to rely upon them, countering one force with another, and therefore to provide some sense of security for yourself. They should have known that that would not get very far. Those treaties were not worth the paper they were printed on. You can't rely on a foreign power if they are wicked. They'll tell you one thing and do something else in a heartbeat. We see that in a recent dump of WikiLeaks information where diplomatic cables going back and forth have shown that in public matters, various Middle Eastern nations were decrying Israel and the United States and complaining about our influence in that region. But then you find out back on the back channels, they're coming to the United States and saying, you've got to please take out Iran. Chop off the head of the snake. That's the real problem here in the Middle East. So you have people saying one thing and doing something else. Are you afraid? Our fears are not simply geopolitical. They're personal at times. Fears of the loss of a job, the loss of an income, an inability to pay for one's mortgage or to take care of one's family. Perhaps problems within the family frighten you. A teenager getting out of control, falling into bad company. Perhaps you have others who are creating threats in the neighborhood. All kinds of issues that make us afraid. But more focused is what Isaiah's concern is, and that is not just simply the larger geopolitical concerns or the personal, economic, social concerns that we all have, but specifically our concern as believers in Jesus Christ, as those who trust in the Lord. Are we afraid of those who are around us? The challenge is that there are many who will criticize, mock, or insult us because of our faith. And to protect ourselves from that criticism, from those insults, from that mockery, we keep quiet. We shut ourselves off. We hide within our churches or within our small prayer groups. And we're safe in that setting. But if we go out into the world and proclaim faith in Jesus Christ as the only way of salvation, then we expose ourselves to laughter, to ridicule, to mockery, and sometimes to real opposition, hostility. Your employer may not be comfortable with having a Christian in his employment, and so he may look for an opportunity to move you off his payroll. There are many different ways in which Christians will face affliction. And certainly, when governments become hostile to Christian faith, when they move in the direction of a humanistic worldview, then our concerns only increase. Isaiah writes to counter the temptation to fall into habits of fear, a sense that we need to cower before the ungodly, or that we should withdraw and hide. When you look at this 51st chapter, of course it follows the 50th chapter, where we saw that God provides us with the servant of the Lord, who himself is, as we described him last week, a resolute man. A man who has a face like flint, going to do the will of the Lord. And he is one who is taught of the Father, and he instructs his people. We are those who are to listen to this resolute man and to be shaped in his image. We are to be made like him. We too should share that face of flint. We should be made strong and bold in the day of hostility. This 51st chapter does, of course, follow the 50th in its thought. You'll notice at the beginning of the chapter you have an exhortation to listen to me, you who pursue righteousness and who seek the Lord. This exhortation to listen occurs 3 times in this text, periodically, and they mark different sections of the text. Verse 1, and then verse 4 again, listen to me, my people, and hear me, my nation. And then verse 7, hear me, you who know what is right, you people who have my law in your hearts. Isaiah is taking this servant of the Lord who himself has been instructed by the Lord and who teaches with an instructed tongue, and now he says to his congregation, listen to me. As Isaiah often does, you have this triad, this threefold exhortation. Listen, listen, listen. He again has to shake us up and capture our attention because we're so preoccupied with the things that are around us. We're so frightened by the challenges that are before us with every day that we tend to forget that God is speaking to us and we need to listen. We need to listen to Him. His word is far more important than what Diane Sawyer will say on ABC News, who I listen to regularly. God's word speaks with authority, and it is the final word that we must give attention to. And so God exhorts His church to listen to Him so that we might be strengthened and helped and equipped for each day. Listen to me. And it's not just simply hearing some words, with your ears, paying attention to the sermon or listening to a radio preacher or something like that. It's listening with a heart that's ready to respond. He is addressing those who are the invisible church, as we talked about a moment ago, those who truly know the Lord, those who seek the Lord and know His righteousness, who have His righteousness written on their hearts. It's these people who have a spiritual disposition to hear what God has to say and then to implement it in their lives. It's these people that God is speaking to. And He speaks to you and I today just as clearly, just as directly as God spoke through Isaiah the prophet long ago. Listen to me. Well, we have this exhortation to listen to the Lord given to us here, and the text centers on that 7th verse. Really, the 7th and 8th verses form the hinge for the text that we have from verses 1 through 16. And the center of the text is this exhortation at the end of verse 7. Do not fear the reproach of men, or be terrified by their insults. That's the main point that Isaiah wants to convey. That's the charge that God has for His people. Do not be afraid. He repeats this exhortation later on in the conclusion of this little sermon. In verse 13, don't live in constant terror every day because of the wrath of the oppressor. Where is this wrath? And so forth. We are not to fear mortal men. Verse 12. You see, here is the heart of the message. We are not to fear men. So this is what we need to listen to. Why should we not fear men? What is the reason for this exhortation? There seems to be every reason to fear men. And when we talk about God, well, He's just something up there in the ether, and who knows where and when He'll be there to help us. In the meantime, I've got real problems. I got bills to pay and all the rest. How will this happen? What will God do for me? Well, God takes His people on a history lesson to remind them of the things which He has done. And that is a fruitful exercise for each of us when we are troubled by enemies that we face. When we face the secularists, the humanists, or the wicked who are engaged in their evils and they're specifically hostile to us, we need to remind ourselves and strengthen ourselves by reflecting on God's work of salvation in the past. What has God done already that should encourage us to know that He will help us in the future? You see, history is important. God's perspective on history especially is what we should listen to. And God takes us back to 2 events in Israel's history to remind them of His great and mighty power and His saving purpose on behalf of His people.